Welcome to Three Devs and a Maybe, the podcast series for beginner web developers and general web enthusiasts. Now, introducing your show hosts, Michael Budd, Fraser Hart, Lewis Caines, and Ed Mann.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 16th episode of Three Devs and a Maybe, the podcast that is brought to you from usually four web developers. Tonight it's just two. It's just myself, Lewis Caines, and my good friend Ed Mann.
Hello.
Evening, Ed.
Hello. It's one dev and a maybe, I think, tonight, isn't it? Again.
Oh yeah, true. Who am I? Am I the dev in the situation?
You're the dev here, so I'm that maybe. You know.
Oh, well, maybe you are. Maybe you are.
We're backed by popular demand. You know, just the two of us.
Right. Let's cut to the chase. Where are they then?
I have no idea. Actually, no. I think Fraser is doing his course again because I do remember him not last week, the week before, actually saying something. And Mickey double booked himself. The guy doesn't believe in calendars. Like, he just doesn't believe in using Google Calendar. Like, he's a very social guy. You know, the guy has got a lot of friends, you know, and a lot of meet and greets he has to do. He's pretty much the queen.
I'll tell you what, he's got one less friend right now, I'll tell you that. you stand however you want to on the situation.
Oh,
but,
dear.
And as for all these forestry courses, you know... Fraser, if you haven't got it by now, mate, you're not going to get it. You know, come back to the podcast.
How many? You know, exactly. How many ways can you actually arrange flowers? That turns out a lot.
Well, I wouldn't know. Maybe
that's the truth. Yeah, actually, I wouldn't know even. We're not going to Wikipedia, but yeah, sure.
Do you know, it seems like forever since the one last week we did. I'm just trying to remember. We had Justin on, didn't we?
We did, yeah. We've done really well, actually. We got some really positive feedback. Thanks for the emails from some people. They were really positive, saying, and I think what we're going to try and do is plan to have a couple more similar vein, like, you know, with a person coming in and we just pretty much grill them for an hour and a half or so.
Yeah, it seemed to be a format that worked pretty well, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mickey's trying to hope to get someone in. I'm hoping to get someone in so we can... hopefully in the next couple of weeks, maybe, you know, in your podcast feed, you'll be able to see there'll be a couple more interesting people.
Cool. I haven't seen any of the feedback from last week. Actually, did you say I haven't seen our emails. So what sort of feedback?
Oh no, we just got a nice email from a guy saying that he really enjoyed the last episode, the Justin one. You know that.
Oh, cool.
And I think listening back to it, because when we're doing the podcast, I'm kind of half into, you know, just thinking, what do I have to say next? So when I listened back to it and everything, I was like, yeah, Justin knows his stuff. Very interesting podcast indeed.
Did this guy stay in it for the long haul, or what was it?
You know, I don't know. I tell you that was that was our longest show, and it showed, didn't it? Really,
that was crazy. I couldn't believe it went on for that long. I was like, we're usually pretty good at sticking to the hour, but this one just. You know, we just went with the flow, and it just lasted for as long as it did.
Exactly it. Exactly it. And we'll see how long this one goes, you know, because last time we and you ended up talking for like an hour and 20 minutes, but that's edited down as well, so better watch out. Yeah,
how have you been keeping anyway? What have you been up to
really good, man. Same freelance stuff. I'm pretty much, you could literally insert the same thing each week for me. Yeah, so there's freelance stuff carrying on, and I've got another blog post that I've just been speaking to you off air on and about, and using anonymous functions and closures in PHP. So closures and anonymous functions, they've been around since 5.3, but I still think a lot of people don't use them, probably because they don't. It's one of the things where they don't know if they support, you know, if you get support for them, because some people probably were still using setups in the 5.2 era and stuff like that. But yeah, I've given I thought I'd do a blog post on that, because I know me and you spoke about it last week when we had a little meet up on Thursday, and I gave one of the weirdest examples ever, and I was thinking that's not like a string example. And I was like, no. So I thought what I did was set aside a couple of hours and then wrote up a validation things to kind of give it like a real feel about why they're so powerful and useful.
Yeah, I'll be looking at that. Closures is definitely one of the areas of PHP that I don't know. I still struggle to get my head around it.
Well, it's very confusing. There's so many technical terms that they use because it's all from lambda calculus. They call anonymous function is a lambda, but really all a lambda is a function with no name.
Isn't lambda a funky dance? the lambada.
Lambada. What is the lambada? How does this go? This dance?
That's enough of that. Yeah.
No Cronenberg, and you know, so we don't. Get
I'm rocking a lemonade and lime as we speak.
Lemonade and lime.
But it is in a Foster's glass, so you know.
Was this this is a borrowed Foster's glass or a
long-term borrowing?
A long-term borrowing. Yep. It's like going to the library.
Yeah.
Oh dear. But yeah, so that's pretty much been my week. How about you?
Yeah, really not much to report on the work front. Just same project. Well, actually, it's kind of ground to a halt now because the content hasn't really been coming in still. So I've just been
So is it the
messing
whole
around.
site content, all of it, or is there just
Pretty
bits and
much.
lovely.
There's basically when this site's finished, it's going to be about 60, 70 pages on it. It's going to be a big site, but the majority of the main pages all follow the same template. So it is
That's
just
good.
a case of putting the content in.
That's when programming comes into its strength, dynamic pages. It's like you can do all that hard stuff and I don't have to copy and paste new static HTML.
Yeah, I got shown a copy of the sitemap for it today, like the updated sitemap, and it's just huge. So, but that's the interesting thing. Like the programming side of it is pretty much done. But
how's the framework going with that? Because this is your first build, isn't it, with your new framework?
It is, yeah. It's going pretty well. I've had a couple of bits to tweak on it, but to be honest, I haven't encountered many bugs at all with it, and I think that's because of trying to stick to this modular approach.
That's worked really well, has it?
Well, yeah,
the HMVC hierarchical model view controller.
Exactly, everything's kind of feeding off of one area of code. So, like all my database methods and everything like that, each module only uses one database method. So if I can get something to work for one module, I know that it'll work for all the modules. So,
and how about the namespacing that we brought up last Thursday when we met up? Was that successful, or did you think?
It was successful. It was just time consuming. I've had quite a few sort of retweets and Twitter comments about a nice namespacing video link that I put on Twitter from Jesse Ream that I spoke about last week.
Yes, brilliant that one. That was a brilliant YouTube video.
Yeah, what I learned sadly was there are no shortcuts, unfortunately, with it. Once you've got an application of a fair size and you decide that you need to go back and add namespacing to it, you need to then go back and debug all your pages that call the various methods and
cry a little bit.
Bobs. Yeah, it took me probably to go through the whole site and do it. It took me about 3.5 hours.
I suppose it's a good idea just to see, like, kind of go back over the architecture of the site, though, is it? Well, the actual application, web application framework, and kind of, I'm sure you probably change some bits while you're at there because
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the other
thing. It makes you work in a certain way.
It gave me an opportunity to just test the whole thing from scratch again because essentially every point that I got to in the site was broken because it needed to be fixed by the
And it makes you have to go through the whole logic again, the whole code base, and just
Yeah, but the good thing that came out of that is that it was working fine. So now I've added that in, so I've got the reassurance of that for the future. And then, so that was my week last week. Over the weekend, I went to see your beloved Fulham.
Yes, and thank you, sir, for going because we won.
You did win.
There's me watching it on a stream. I won't say how I got this stream, but there's you actually at the ground.
This is what my brother-in-law was questioning as to how you were able to know what was going on. But it was very much a game of two halves, wasn't it? It was very crazy.
It was pretty amazing, and like the thought to be a goal but wasn't a goal, and
Yeah, if we could just go into this just very quickly. What was your thoughts on the to anyone that saw Newcastle Fulham on Saturday, the literal last second of the game, the handball that wasn't given in, the penalty.
Oh, come on. Yeah, well, you being a Newcastle fan now would obviously say, I thought it was balls of hand. He couldn't move out the way.
The only thing, if it was a lot more crucial, then it might have been more of an issue, but it didn't really matter either way to Newcastle.
How was your the person you went with?
He was
he in good spirits afterwards, or depleted?
He was already pretty disillusioned because he figured that Newcastle pretty much got their backsides kicked the whole game anyway. So, but he thought, well, it was interesting because there was the foul in the second half that led to the goal. And this football chat's probably going to get cut out of the final podcast, but if it's still in, then the rest of it didn't go very well. Anyway, but yeah, there was the foul that wasn't given, and then that led to the goal that actually stood. So, there could have been about 4 or 5 different versions of the result.
And did you go out afterwards? Did you enjoy yourself in Putney?
Yeah, well, we stopped in Putney very quickly, but yeah, it's nice there. It's nice there.
And it's a nice ground, isn't it? The ground's really nice. It's one of those like old quaint grounds that hasn't changed, hasn't got all commercialised really.
No, it's really nice. It's right next to the river, and there's we were sat in the quote unquote mutual end, which it felt like the Newcastle end at the time. But
Fulham fans aren't the loudest, but to be honest, I think we got pretty loud at the end. It was quite crazy because it was such a good game.
It was. Well, the first half was just dead. Nothing happened, and the second half was good. So, but yeah, there was a nice area down around the back. We'd go down, get a drink, and kind of stood and look over the river and that. It was a really really good Saturday. You know how on your weekends you just want to spend those just unwinding as best you can.
Absolutely, away from the computer.
Oh God, yeah. This was definitely one of those.
And nice sunny weather as well. We've had
lovely,
crazy weather. Good. Anyway, moving on from the weather because that always goes down. I heard from you today. You maybe have a project in the pipeline.
Yeah, we had an interesting meeting today. We had
care to share a little bit?
Yeah, all I can say it's for an alarms company. It will be for. I'm saying again all the time this week. Oh no, I can't shift that. But anyway, it's going to be a really really big site. Actually, it's going to encompass some e-commerce stuff, and I haven't really done anything that's encompassed any e-commerce kind of stuff. So I've been dying to get a project where I'm going to have the opportunity to create shopping carts and all that kind of stuff, and then what will probably end up being using the Stripe API for the payment gateways.
Oh, very cool. Good choice in payment gateway.
Have you used it?
I haven't used it in production, but I haven't just me having a little mess around with it because Mickey had a lot of fun when we were back working together with PayPal. And
I remember you and him at our old job with the MU project messing around with PayPal a lot.
Yes, there is. Well, it's one of those APIs that I don't know why they want to make it so hard. We're giving them money. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
And then you see Stripe, and they in an example. It's one of these three line examples. Like, yep, that's how you do it in PHP. Yep, this is how you do it in Java. Yep, this. And it's like, why can't it be this simple with PayPal? Or why can't they just do some R&D, some development in there, and just make it this simple? But yeah,
I really can't wait to check it out. I mean, I've never since I started doing the job have I heard a library or an API kind of raved about like this since it came out. So it seems to be solving a lot of problems.
Absolutely, and it's definitely. I mean, it's definitely needed as well. But I think the thing that they have, I think their payment, they get a bit more of the money. I think there's a percentage so PayPal's better still on the percentage front for how much they take off the total price that you will pay. But for that sheer fact of just being simpler,
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's the simple, and I take it the security things all taken care of, and all of that stuff.
All that jazz, yeah. It's the same, very similar, but it's just the way you interact with it is so much nicer. And but especially when it deals with money, you want it to be as simple as possible so you don't screw it up.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it'll be really cool to work with, and it'll be nice when I get to the whatever point in the show to maybe give a bit of a review on it.
Absolutely, I'm looking forward to that, and I think that's a very good segue to security.
On
the web. Security on the web.
Apparently it's needed, Ed. I can't see the sense.
Oh, it's password 1234. Easy.
Putting security in is only going to make it more difficult to hack websites.
Exactly. That's a very good point. Yeah, these people, we need to make their lives too hard.
These hackers, they're having a nightmare. Bless them, trying to hack into these websites. People keep sticking all these security measures on.
Exactly.
But
we hope to make it harder for them today because we hope to, That's one thing that, just today I've been able to write a couple of some notes up on some security stuff because an email way back we got was from a guy who then, said, is there any chance you could do a podcast on web security? And finally we've been able to pencil it in and hopefully planning this week and maybe next week if it does overflow a bit to really go over like the important concepts that every web developer needs to know about if they don't understand it completely, but to have an idea about and to think about when they're developing web applications, because once it goes online anyone can access it, which is a brilliant thing and it's a powerful thing, but it's also a scary and security conscious thing. And I think the best thing to do first is to know your enemy. You know your enemy, and then you can work from there. And there are three types of main hacking or hackers on the web. There are these
people like Ed,
people like me, naughty, yeah. Well, you probably are people like me, but I'm not like this. But you've got your hacktivists, which are your script kiddies. They are the people who are opportunists. They're really just trying to find an easy way into any system just to be able to do it for the lulz. And there's a funny thing because LulzSec, are a group of these hacktivists, and a big thing happened in 2011. I'm sure you're aware of it, where Sony, a lot of their passwords got leaked out by one SQL injection attack. And LulzSec, obviously, they were doing this for a couple of months, actually, just targeting Sony on random servers, services that they had. And one of the big payloads they were able to get was, a lot of people's user and user passwords that were all plain text, which is always great as well. Very dangerous. You've got an email and you've got their password. You're like, well, why don't you just check the email there? Because that's what they do, isn't it? It's a lot of people use the same password for a lot of things. So if you've got your email, you'll just go on all these sites now, like Facebook. Oh yeah, just use your email because I know your email, and then your password may be the same. So it doesn't only affect that service; it affects anything else on the web.
Yeah, definitely.
So you've got Oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say, are you still on that bit? Because I was going to say we've kind of touched on one of the first main areas, which is SQL injection. So I wondered whether to go.
I've got a couple of bits more, but then because there is kind of like the way I've got is I'll go into a minute. Yeah, so we've got career criminals, and they are people that make a good money and good business out of doing these things. So they're far more organised than your hacktivists. They're far more. They're not just going to be running bots over your system. They're going to be able to work out and try and penetrate a system. Then you have your nation states, and they have large resources, and they're typically politically driven. Now, I think the one that we mainly have to deal with in our world is the hacktivists and the script kiddies. Unless we deal with big systems and we work at big companies where career criminals may come into it as well. But really, you should be protecting your site, and you should be thinking about any possible thing that could happen on your site, and trying to safeguard against that. And there's a great project that is going on. It's been around for a couple of years, well, actually quite a few years now, and it's called the OWSAP. And what that is, ASP, yes, and it's the Open Web Application Security Project, and it's non-profit, which is great. It's set up to make the web a more secure place, so it's got a good, intentions at heart. It's technology agnostic. So it doesn't, specifically say you have to be using PHP, you have to be using this tech stack. It's got a broad appeal. So all of the stuff that you learn from this website, and it's a great website, definitely recommend you go onto it and stuff. And also their top 10 list, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah, I was just looking through that.
But, it's great because then it stands the test of time. It's not like, these examples were written in Java, so they can't translate to Ruby. They're all things that are on a higher level, similar to like design patterns and stuff, where they're on a higher level to, that you can reuse them. And then obviously this has been, because it's a non-profit, it's been contributed by, many security professionals. So top people in their fields have helped contribute to this to make the web a safer place. And that's their job, and that's what they want to do. Going back onto the top 10 list. So there's a compiled list that they did of the top 10 issues or security problems that commonly happen on the web and are the most popular and most frequent. The current one that's been published was last year in 2013, and I think the great thing about this list is it doesn't give you everything, but it does give you, and it kind of gives you those bullet point kind of things of these are the things that I should be paying attention to, because you've got to start off somewhere really.
I really love the way these pages are laid out. Actually, they give you so much information,
nice diagrams and everything. I'll definitely put it in the show notes. Like, it's just a PDF that you can print off and just have a look at. And the nice thing about this list, so what should be happening with this is it should be used by developers as a reference. So when you're implementing, and you should be doing it because it's a reference that then you're able to say, okay, I should be thinking about this when I'm dealing with session management. I should be dealing with this when I've got, my cookies, etc. It's actually used by companies as a standard to grade, web applications or applications that they're going to be using. So, the thing there is that, that they don't know the technical aspects, so they need this document to be able to say, look, these are tick it off. Almost they like that, the whole ticking things off thing. And then it's also used by security professionals, and it's used for reference for them for testing and auditing subject systems. So they can then also have a tick off system that then they can talk to the company about. So I suppose, have you ever heard of the Open Web Application Security Project at all? Or...
I must admit, not by this definition, and this is really refreshing for me to see this, because I'm not going to lie here. I know what I would consider to be the basics of security, and I know how not to be stupid with security and everything. But I would assume that there are guys out there working for web companies that specialise in security. These are the guys that know everything that there is to know, and unfortunately, the nature of the web, even the hackers are going to get more and more intelligent. So you can only do what you can do to keep up with it.
Exactly. And you could have a nice, shiny new system, and you've got a brilliant website that you've used, the latest and greatest frameworks, blah, 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 blah. But guess what? If someone can hack into your system, it's a pointless web application, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I think what you were saying just now about things like storing unencrypted databases, passwords in databases. I mean, Christ.
It's unfortunately still seen. So it's one of those unfortunate things that, yeah, well, that is definitely, I think, maybe we can just have a little talk about that first, is passwords should always be hashed. You should be using PHP 5.5's password _ hash function. If you can't use that, there is a polyfill that the IRC Maxwell guy who made it that will work down to, I think, 5.3 point something, 0.7, I think it is, because of a bug there is actually in certain entropy things. So there is a way to maintain using that one, system, that API, and it works really well because there's no reason not to be hashing your passwords. You shouldn't be using MD5 anymore. You shouldn't be using SHA-1 anymore on its own. You shouldn't be using SHA-1 or MD5 with a nonce or a seed. You should be, it's a funny name, but yeah. So just
sorry, no, I wasn't. I wasn't laughing at that because that's inappropriate to laugh at that word. But
and
the fact that people use it like MD5. Like, I mean, that was when I started to learn about web security, and all the first few videos I saw on storing passwords in databases.
Well, we're
using MD5.
That's it. And I think the thing is again, there's a lot of information on the web of security with PHP where it's very old stuff, and there's a little story. So MD5 and SHA-1 are great at what they do, and the idea behind them really is they're not there for security. They're there to hash files or hash strings. So to be able to quickly, and the idea of them is for speed. They're there for saying, I quickly want to know the identifier, the fingerprint of this file, so I can just check to make sure if it's the same file or something. You typically get that on the web when you're downloading an open source project or a Linux distribution. There's like an MD5 or a SHA-1 hash, and you can just check to see that yours is the same as that, so you haven't got a malicious, something malicious hasn't happened during the actual download of it. So they go by the fact that they want to be quick. Now, we don't want things to be quick, because the quicker it is, the easier it is for a malicious user to brute force attack us. And there's a lot of thing now with the fact that these. So it typically was done with software, but now with graphics cards and stuff that are able to be programmed, like with CUDA and stuff like that, you can now on actual hardware crack and do these MD5 hashes, which does ridiculous speeds. So on their own, they're awful, and the same then with you've got rainbow tables and stuff, which is quick lookup and being able to hack a system with pre-computed hashes. Cs do help a lot actually, but then there is another sense of, like what you use for a seed, etc. Then there's also the fact of what you now want to use is you want to use something called encrypt and bcrypt. And the idea behind these is they also do something called, I forgot what the actual technical name is, but all the application is that they slow down the process. They're a slower algorithm, which makes it more confusing. So eventually this algorithm will become, hardware and software will become quicker, be able to optimize it, so, bad people can come again. But at this time, it's a slower algorithm to use. But also it does this thing called iterations, and it will iterate, and it will say, oh, please do this algorithm really like 50 times. So it will do, and it will be a lot slower that way. Even though for you, it won't seem that slower when you're just logging in that one time. But if someone's trying to brute force attack your a list of passwords, a list of hashes, it's going to make a considerable difference to them.
Yeah, is this what was the PHP function you mentioned at the beginning? That
so it's password _ hash.
Password _ hash. So are you saying this is the ultimate way now? Because I've been using for in the past like things like phpass and things like that, which at the time when I researched were. Everyone was saying this is the thing to use.
Yeah, I mean, I remember me going on one of my old blog posts that I had to update a couple of months ago was that, I did definitely go behind, the PHP pass, because at that time it was the only way of simply doing it.
Right.
Now with 5.5, there was a lot of debate on do they include this into the core of PHP, and I'm glad they did, because it's one of those things that everyone needs to do, so let's just do it right out of the box.
So what's the simple example then of getting it in and getting it back out again? Then what are the main what's the method there? So it's
I think it's PHP. It's password _ hash, and I think you just pass in what you want to be hashed.
Yeah, and then that's
you do a verify, and a verify will then just do a verify on what you've got what the hash is, and then what your actual thing is. Not sure about the semantics completely, but I will put in the show notes the examples that he gives, and they're very simple examples. And they're as simple as using MD5. I mean, I know back in the day, the nice thing about MD5 and SHA-1 is that you can actually take away the check from PHP and actually do it like, say, in the database layer. So I used to sometimes naughtily say, you know, just do a check, and you could actually do an MD5, and it would actually do a function in MySQL that would then do it for you instead. So it would get out that you know, that gubbins out of the actual PHP script. But really, you should be doing it in the PHP script using these technologies now.
Yeah, cool. That's pretty decent. That. So I'm gonna have to look into that myself. Like I said earlier on, you know, I'm by no means a security expert, and you know, it always changes.
It always changes. You know, it's one of those fields that always changes, like your next framework. You know, because people find, you know, flaws, people find backdoors into systems and stuff, and you have to continually be, you know, on your toes about it.
Yeah,
and I think. Sorry.
No, I was going to say. All I was saying. That's why when I was, but obviously back in the early days, and when I watched these tutorials that were using MD5 to hash things, and at the time I didn't know any better. It was just frustrating, like, because these technologies I think were available then. So I don't know why anyone would go out to teach a security video and include MD5. You know, it's not something to be messed with. You know, go straight in with what you need to do. You know, cut to the point.
That's it, and I think that's why it's good that it's in the core, because that's the trouble. It's fine having libraries that are external, but having it in the core makes everyone be able to use it then.
Yeah.
Without use third party, you know.
I've got some work to do then. I'm probably going to find out quite a lot tonight about stuff that I need to go back to for projects.
Well, and I mean, today when I was researching, I've learned so much today with this. So it's, you know, it may be a bit overwhelming, but I think it's good stuff to just at least know and go back on and, you know, re-listen to and stuff like that.
Yeah. Would you say that this particular subject comes at number 2 on the top 10, or?
What you mean on the
OWASP?
Oh wow!
10?
I mean, for me,
I'm just looking at the list. I mean, it says broken authentication and session management. I mean, I'm sure that encompasses a lot more.
It encompasses into there. It does. Well, we can go through. So what I'm planning to do is the top 10, and then so today it'll be the top 5, and then we'll go through the other ones, or we'll, you know, recap if we do overflow and stuff. We can go back, you know, and we'll continue where we stopped today. Next week. So the first one is our good friend injection. SQL injection. So it's commonly SQL injection, but it can also be like XPath and NoSQL injection now. Pretty much anything that you can query for information. Something like LDAP, it was used as well. So it's the number one because it's so very commonly found in the wild, because databases are so popular. I suppose the real question is asking you, when was the last time you built a website without a database backend?
Yeah,
and
very rarely.
Exactly, and that's you know, because this, you know, it's parts and parcel now, isn't it? Already, you know, you have the query language and you have your programming language, and the two need to interact. And also,
the only reason sorry to cut in there.
That's right.
Apologies. I think the only reason I can think that this is still top of the pile, because obviously now there's things like PDO which everyone should be using. The only reason I can think that this is still top of the pile is because of, you know, older code where people haven't
absolutely. No,
so I wouldn't think this is going to hang around at number 1 for too long.
You know what? I suppose you could say the argument is like IE6. You know, things that shouldn't hang around for a long time do, annoyingly. It's one of those things, isn't it? You know, like the bad thing still is there. You know, it's like Windows Vista will be around. You still remember it.
Oh, you hate Microsoft tonight. Wow.
Oh, I only got love for them. I only got them for the, you know. So
Bill Gates coming on next week as well.
Wouldn't that be an amazing thing? Getting Big Billy's on, you know? Billy, yeah. Oh, Steve Jobs, boo, yeah. Apple sucks. Linus Torvalds. So anyway, moving back on to the injection. Yes, so I suppose one of the other things why it's so common and why it's number 1 is because there's automated tools available that can compromise your application security. So they're like bots that can do this for you. And, you know, they constantly are just hammering sites just to check. So if you can automate this, you know, and let a computer do this instead, the malicious users just able to, you know, just do CPU cycles at it and, you know, see if they can get into your system.
Yeah.
And I suppose the idea actually is, what is a SQL injection? So the idea is to access data that is stored in a database, which the user that's trying to attempt to use it has not got permission to access. So, you know, it's trying to gain more access to the information, trying to either query it, to select it, or to delete it in some scarier senses. You know, information that they're not allowed to do, actions that they're not allowed to perform, that you shouldn't be able to perform, but they are able to by, you know, these naughty ways. And what normally they do in the sense of querying it is they do something technically called data exploitation. I think I said that, which is data theft pretty much. And the idea is it just prints it out to the web page. So normally, typically, say an example would be you have users, and you have a users table, and then you have I would like to get the first user, to get the ID for the first user, and I supply in a get parameter the ID equal to 1. Now, the trusted part of that query, of that whole URL, is the URL itself and the resource location. So we can trust that, the example.com that we're on and the user's resource is fine, and even the ID bit's fine. But it's the information that the user has actually passed to us, which is the number one that we can't trust. Because users will do, they will break things. They may accidentally break things, but they will maliciously sometimes trying to break things. Yeah. So you shouldn't trust this information that's coming through. And there's a reason, so in this case, that maybe you have a select star from users where the ID is equal to 1. Now, if you were being naughty, you would literally just grab that get parameter, let's say in PHP, grab it, and then you would just concatenate it into a string. And you wouldn't do any escaping or anything like that. You would just say, yeah, whatever comes in, I'm allowing that. And what someone could do then is they could do something valid, but they could also do something naughty by, say, an example of, well, I can, as well as supply just the 1, I could say, or 1 equal 1. And that's a very common example of a common SQL injection attack where they just provide something that's true. So not only now will they get the ID of 1, they'll get everyone's ID, everything, yeah. And including, and this is pretty much how Logset got the thing. They just did one of these injection attacks. One thing wasn't patched, one area of the site wasn't patched, and they got all this information. So, it's a scary thing to think, my web application's bulletproof. But if you've got one page that does something, that isn't secure, or the common example is, you've got a person who's just starting out in a company, a junior developer, and then they upload it to a site and they don't use the correct protocols that you've put in place. This page is now, your site is now unsecure.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's dangerous.
Very dangerous.
And some of the kind of protection for it I've seen in the past has been a bit scary as well.
Yeah, so there's this whole thing about the protection it's whitelisting versus blacklisting. And the idea is that if you whitelist,
is this sticking to purely MySQL for the moment? Is this before we go into PDO? Do you mean, or
yeah? So these are things you can do to protect. So the SQL parameterization thing we could definitely talk about. Yeah, but the first thing would be whitelisting, blacklisting. So whitelisting is the idea that only these things are being allowed. Blacklisting means these things are definitely not allowed. Now, whitelisting is a lot better than blacklisting, because with blacklisting, you have to include everything that it can't do. With whitelisting, you're just saying these are only allowed, and you're chucking everything out. Again, users are malicious. They will work things around to say, oh, you didn't include this, example of it and stuff. So the idea of it with actually just whitelisting untrusted data is to check for patterns. So, say if an example with the user of ID 1, well, I want to make sure that what they provided me is an integer. Mm-hmm. Because that's the only one, a positive integer at that, actually, because, my ID isn't going to be negative integer. So I only want this to be a legal number, a legitimate integer. So that is a pattern that it has to meet. And that way, then, I can then go into my second check, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is the parameterization. But that allows me to be sure, then, that the only information that is going through is something that I want to go through.
Yep,
definitely. And then we have, as you were talking about, the parameterization. So I don't know if you want to have a little talk about SQL parameterization with PDO and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, PDO is just it's kind of the modern way now of querying databases, isn't it? I mean, it's certainly one of the main new libraries that is used. I mean, using MySQL solely is just definitely not recommended now, and functions sort of MySQL real escape string and all that.
It's been deprecated, which is great.
Oh, has it?
Yeah, it's been deprecated. I think 5.5's got it. It's gone now.
Yeah. Well, that's good. So, I mean, the whole idea of using PDO is it separates the values, doesn't it? And then you bind them back in later on.
That's it. So the idea is you've got your untrusted data and it's separated from the actual SQL command. Yeah. So that everything that the user inputs is always considered as data and put into the table that way. So so they aren't able to do special things such as like do ORs, because OR is the Boolean, actual thing, and that's a command. That isn't anything to do with the data. And if they did try to do it, we would insert it into the database as if it was data.
Exactly, yeah.
And it also allows us to typecast each parameter. So stuff like the ID, you can typecast it with like libraries and a functionality such as PDO and MySQLi, which is another one we have to talk to it about in a minute. And that allows you then to say, look, this has to be an integer, and it will be cast to an integer. This all goes down to the fact that concatenation is bad, and you should never use it with untrusted data. You can use MySQL, the original driver, and also MySQL real landscape string legitly without security issues, but you have to concatenate them correctly, include the escaping of the string. You have to include quotes inside the string, which seem a little bit weird when you're doing all this concatenation. So the idea is, do not use concatenation or interpolation in a query string with any untrusted data. Always use parameter binding. And the way you can do that is in PHP is by using PDO, and that's the PHP database object, or MySQLi is one. That's what it is. It's MySQL's. So PDO can be used in a lot of different. It's got multiple drivers for different database protocols. So you can use it for Postgres. You can use it with Microsoft SQL, and then MySQL. MySQLi is pretty much what MySQL, the original driver, should be now, and that includes binding, etc., and all that. So that either one of those. I tend to go with PDO because I think that's going to have longer. It's got a lot longer life left because it caters for all of these different databases. Because maybe one day I don't want to stay with MySQL. I want to move to Postgres or something like that. I've got that option there to at least then use the same type, even though the queries may be slightly different, but it's the same type, system using the same class and stuff. So what they do with the parameters is you specify saying, that these are placeholders, and then before you actually execute the query, you bind saying that placeholder has this information, and maybe supplying a type, a cast type, saying that this is actually an integer, this is actually a date. The idea is that the placeholder then data conforms to the acceptable range of values that you're actually allowing using that query, and they're all going to be considered data, and none of them are going to be commands or SQL commands.
Cool.
The other thing you can do is, and this is a really good one to do, and I don't think a lot of people do this, is configuring your database correctly. Separating accounts. So I'm sure I'm very bad at this. I've been very bad in the past. Is that I just have a user account that I use. So and I
do you mean just literally one set of username, password, host in the config file?
Yeah. Well, you have your root, and then you also have just the user, and that and you just say. They're allowed to check it. They're allowed to have all these columns. The user is allowed to have all columns, etc. And that. So the idea should be really you should separate them out into user access requirements. So you should have maybe a user and an admin, and then you're applying this. The idea is the principle of least privilege. So you're only giving them what they need. So you're thinking, all right, what does a user need? And you're not giving them any more because that giving them more could then be the problem, of them being compromised. So the idea, an example I've got is, does a user need to have access to a login table? Should they be able to query a login table? Well, no, they shouldn't. Admins should be able to query it in the back end, but but users should not be able to query the login table. Maybe they should be able to insert into the login table if they've had a problem. But it's all these things that, with the query, with the logs, if they got the logs, they could then check to see how your system works and how, all the information that you store maybe in the stack trace in your PHP code. So it all adds up to areas of weakness in your actual system. And then again, we were talking about this, our MySQL real escape string. It gets a lot of bad press. It's not safe, but it's only because people don't use it right. But they don't use it right because the whole idea is flawed in the concatenation, system, way of doing things. So prepared statements are your friend, and you should be using PDO and MySQLi. And there's a couple of really good blog posts that I'm going to put into the show notes that I found last week that explain them really well. Another one that is our good friend is RRMs, Object Relational Mappers. So they're actually good as well in practice because though they don't actually deal with the actual, the actual injection itself, they do provide a framework to write safer queries. So they don't use the concatenation, and they typically do provide you with the ability to then, escape the string before you use it. And the last thing I want to take away with the injection one is to use UTF-8 unless you necessarily need to use another encoding. there are many attacks that take advantage of encoding bypassing encoding. So I would definitely just use UTF-8 unless you need to. If you've got UTF-8 should be perfectly fine for all your needs with foreign characters, etc. So I would definitely recommend to use that.
I think most GUIs set that as a default anyway, don't they?
That's it. Well, it's weird because it's actually a database configuration. So the actual database itself, if you don't, it does it to whatever they've set out. So if you've got maybe you're running it on your own box, it may automatically be set to ISO. I can't remember, but Latin 1 something or other. And I suppose this is a question. Do you know why there is a MySQL real escape string and we don't have MySQL escape string, and why it's called real? I just found out today. It's a very interesting one.
Can't say I do, to be honest. No.
Because isn't it the most like that's really bad English, I was just saying, but isn't it an awful naming convention?
It's terrible. I mean, MySQL real escape string, I mean, the main aim was to get rid of the quotes, wasn't it, or something like that?
Well, it's used to escape. Yes, it's used to escape it, so you know that it's actually treated as data. But there was actually MySQL escape string, which is a much better name but it's not the real one. And the trouble with the first initial version was that it didn't check the database character encoding. Now, in a bit of a technical level, what that may do then is it may treat multi-byte characters as single byte characters. And then you could go into this thing where it could result in the last 2 bytes being escaped into a reserved character, such as a quote. And by that way, then a malicious user could then take advantage of it using a SQL attack. And so that's a bit technical, but what you need to know there is that character encodings is very important because people can, engineer, characters, and they can engineer payloads to take advantage of that.
Yeah. I guess the main thing to say from all this, from my point of view, is get to learn PDO as soon as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that just takes care of a lot of this stuff anyway. So
you won't have to worry about it because you're separating there, your data from your SQL commands. It's also a nicer way to program, to code queries and stuff, I find, because
I think so, yeah.
Because the concatenation gets so messy, and it's nice to just have these placeholders that then they replace themselves. And PDOs are great. It uses exceptions if you want to, and that's one we're going to be talking about, error handling and stuff, I'm sure, later on. Not today, but in a future podcast. So it uses exceptions, and it's got a really good way of lazily, loading up the actual database contents and stuff. So definitely check that out.
Do you use bind param or bind value to do your queries?
I'm more bind value. What about you?
Yeah, I'm the same. I found that much easier because then you can just literally create an array, a key value array to pass in.
That's it. And I mean, you can, and there are external third-party wrappers around, PDO itself, which are quite nice. And, maybe you'll be making your own, because throughout time, you've got your own little way of doing things. So, yeah, definitely check out PDO, though, definitely. And don't be using MySQL, the normal driver, even though, unfortunately, a lot of the books still state it. And I don't think Mickey would be upset me saying that on the course, not his course, but on one of the courses they do at the university he is at, they were actually still using MySQL, the original driver, which is disgusting.
Do you think a lot of sites are going to stop functioning soon?
Well, they're just going to not be running on what has happened, which I think is kind of good, is I did find online, because there was actually that question debate. I was talking to another person on it, and he was having the problem with it, and so I looked online and I found there was a wrapper that actually emulates the same MySQL driver, but he actually uses PDO under the hood, which I think is kind of a nice kind of, even though, to be honest with you, you've still got the bad practices, because it's not the problem with the actual driver. The problem is with how people use it, with concatenation, interpolation. So, that's the problem. But so it's not actually going to fix the problem, but it is going to, stop people from, when it's not, because that's another thing. The problem is that it's great we're removing it, but what actually happens is people don't change the code. They're like, well, we're just going to stay on this version then. And we'll end up having to support, version 5.4. I think that's the last one that actually has it. We've just, for years and years to come, because people aren't going to move. So, it's kind of working this in between, of do we get rid of it completely, or do we support it a bit just to keep people moving on?
Yeah, good point. It's funny, isn't it? Because, it's not like you've got to completely learn how to write SQL all over again. Essentially, you're doing the same thing, but you're just passing it through filters, aren't you?
Absolutely, and you're just making it easier. And the one thing I'll take with the first one with injection is any user input you get, don't trust it. It's untrusted. check it for patterns. Check, okay, this is a number. It has to be a number. This is a phone number. It has to be. This is an email address. And you can use stuff like the filter_vars that I think Mickey spoke about in our PHP documentation podcast. And, these things to sanitize the information or check that it's valid. And, don't allow anything into the database that you don't want.
Distrusting all data. I mean, that to me is rule number one.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you stick to that principle and follow everything through from that through validation, that should take care of most things anyway. If you know exactly what it is that you want to be able to receive into your database, then write the validation that will ultimately allow only that. And if you do that, I can't see there's not going to be many other ways around it. It's going to take care of all that other stuff.
Absolutely, completely agree there, sir.
Yeah.
So
sorry. I was saying it can be fiddly and time consuming, but it's important. It's really important. You can't be lazy because.
No, that's it. And I mean the parameter paradigm, SQL paradigm, is available in all languages. Java uses it. You're going to find this in Python. So it's not just a thing specific to PHP, though. PHP gets knocked a lot because of a lot of security problems have happened with PHP because it's been so popular, and because a lot of it's an easy language for people to get into. So it's a bad combination there for what people find as security conscious. Yeah,
and another big point with validation is, I mean, I don't know where you stand on this, Ed, but I don't use any client side validation at all. I mean, it's pointless essentially, isn't it? I don't think it provides any actual.
The only reason why there's no security protect. The only reason why I use it is for the user experience, because what happens is that if I know it's wrong on the client, there's no point in me sending them a request, making them have to do a request to my server to get the information that, to tell me that it's wrong. I'll do that automatically, maybe, or when you hover, you unfocus or blur off the actual text item or the input type, text, it will come up with an error. So it's really just for the user experience than being a protection thing. As you say, there's no, disable JavaScript and then they can go whatever they want.
I hope I'm assuming there wouldn't be companies out there that use that as their only line.
I'm sure, you know what? We're thinking, hope not. I think that probably means there is. Because, this is the trouble, isn't it? People, they'll do the craziest things.
You can create whatever you want client side, can't you? You can go into your console, inspect the element of any form, and you just make up whatever you like, post whatever value, and
these people, the malicious users, aren't even going to be using browsers. They're just going to be doing requests using simple stuff in like wget and stuff like that. To just post to with their own parameters, so they're not even caring about what you're doing on the page. They're just finding where you're at, where they can send their payload, and then that's it.
Yeah. Sorry, you're gone.
I was just going to say, so that I suppose that's all I've got on injection, SQL injection.
Would parameter tampering kind of come under that, or
parameter tamper?
Like eval stuff like that, passing functions to. Or having the ability to pass a function to a query string.
I suppose actually, because that's all injection, that's all input. Eval is just a bad practice thing to do if you're with untrusted data. So if it's untrusted data from the user, you shouldn't be doing that at all. And eval is bad.
I think to give an example of what you could do if you're passing a parameter to a query string that's getting run through eval, and you hijack that to be like, I don't know, PHP info or something like that. If you have that ability to do that and you don't whitelist your application against functions like that, then suddenly your attacker has got a very easy way to see all your server information and stuff like that. I mean, I don't think many people use either. I know you use it sometimes, but I know that you're a very skilled developer.
Oh no! But the only reason why I use it is
for people who definitely know what they're doing. If you're not sure exactly what it is you're doing, you probably shouldn't use it. But I'm sure for the skilled developer who knows exactly how to protect against the vulnerabilities of it, it's probably very, very useful.
You say that, but I think it's still bad. I think I should be the way that you should do it. Well, the way that Laravel now does it in Laravel 4 is that they actually generate the page, actually physically generate that page that they include then. So they don't use eval. So I think it's performance thing as well, because eval I think is a lot more hungry, CPU hungry on it. But they actually generate the page, and you'll see this. There's like a cache of all your pages that are just hashed, and they're actually that all they do is just load those in and include it, and then do the whole output buffering thing.
Yeah,
which is a better way, but it's not as easy. So the reason why I've got that eval thing is for that simple template function I use. Just on my blog, and I don't really want to have a cache just for generated templates. But maybe if I was to expand on it, I probably would go down that Laravel route.
I'm just thinking of an experience I had with another developer when I was lesser experienced, and all I was trying to do was literally call one function from another function, and he encouraged me to use eval, and I'm wondering whether A, he was clueless, or B, whether he was just trying to teach me bad stuff. I don't know.
I think maybe clueless probably is the... that's crazy.
Yeah, it's only because I thought at the time when he showed me it, and I said to him, "Oh, what does that function do?" And he explained, and I was like, "That sounds a bit dangerous." And that's when I looked it up and found out, like, eval, yeah, Christ, this is like everything all over the internet. This is a function that, at all costs should be avoided if possible.
Well, that goes on quite well with eval, is that you can, in your PHP ini file, disable functions. So you can blacklist them to say these functions aren't allowed to be run. So, to make sure that someone can't maliciously include it on the page, or, upload a script that does it, at a PHP ini level, you can say, look, no, this function is not allowed. File get contents is not file get, but over the network, not allowing them to be able to just load up external resources. So that's quite a.
What other functions are you aware of that are probably to be avoided? Like OS is probably one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's tough though, because they all have their remove directory. I mean, they all have their need. They're required. They all have their purpose, because that's they're useful things. I suppose it's just using it. It's again making sure that the user isn't able to maliciously
don't have it there readily available on a front end page.
Yeah, because I wouldn't say don't use eval, because there's a lot of good uses for eval, like the templating thing, and to say that it's a bad thing, full stop, and never use it is kind of hard, because it's actually very useful in certain examples and certain cases. So anything the user inputs or can have access to input, treat that as just not good stuff. That it could be the worst thing in the world that you don't want them to input. Not all users are going to be nice.
No, and in fact, quite a few of them probably won't be.
Won't be, no, exactly. But either by accident or
just be the most paranoid person that you can be.
Absolutely. So the second on the top 10 list is broken authentication and session management. Now, this is quite an interesting one. The idea of it is, it sounds all complicated, but really what it is the idea is you want to gain unauthorized access to a service by impersonating a registered user or a current user. So the idea is, say you have your user and they've made an authenticated request to a website, so they've logged in. Say Lewis has made an authenticated request to a website, example.com, so he's on there and everything. The attacker, some way, is able then to hijack his request, so find out what his session ID and stuff is, and then me being the attacker there, I'm the nasty person, I then am able to find his request using stuff like cross-type scripting, and we'll go on some other things, and then I'm able to impersonate that request to the website, and that server has no idea if it's me or you doing it. We're both looking like legit users there. So in the eyes of both of them, both requests, they seem to be from legal sources. So there's 3 different types of attack there. There is the authentication cookie theft. So whenever a session's created, typically what happens is that session ID, the actual ID for that unique, because of the web being stateless, to make it stateful, we need to be able to pass these IDs around to say that I'm this person. Typically what happens is you have a cookie that stores the ID in it. And there are ways to exploit using cross-site scripting, which we'll talk about. It comes up next on the list. There's ways of doing it that way. There's ways of doing it with insecure connections. So say if Lewis was on a Wi-Fi connection and it was just, and all that cookie was going through was just typical HTTP, so it wasn't going using certificates and HTTPS, I'd be able to maybe snoop on it and find it that way. Even another way is to actually just retrieve it from the victim's computer itself. So me physically going to access Lou's computer, or using something like a malware to be able to find these cookies out. Then this moves on to the session ID theft. So I don't know, have you ever seen in a PHP site, if you disable cookies, you'll then see something like PHP sesh ID as a get parameter if you're in a session page.
No, I haven't seen that actually.
So what's actually happened there is because so typically what happens is PHP stores its sessions in the cookie, but because if you've disabled cookies, it then needs to be able to store this in another way. And what it does is it normally it will store it in the URL itself, which is very bad.
Yeah, you don't want that.
So so the cookie.
Well, that's just gifting the information on the plate there, isn't it?
And the URL, so that the active session is in the URL, and what actually happens there is that as you say, a lot of people can use be able to just see this, even though it's quite a big hash. But what normally happens is if you can retrieve it from logs, so maybe backups or error reports. This session's been passed around, and I'm able to see it that way. Or the most common thing is that it's very like with all our social network sites and everything now, is someone just copies the link. Because what you do, you copy the link. Say you're logged into a service, but you copy the link and you post it on on Facebook and stuff. And this session ID is now there, and until this session has actually been, disabled, unset, it's been, expires. Anyone can have access to the same site logged in as you, which is kind of scary.
This kind of security stuff does scare me because it's very, very, very technical, isn't it? And it's
well, it is, but I'm hoping. So there's quite a few. So and I was reading it today. I'm like, this is like way over my head. But there are a couple of things you can do, and I'll explain in a minute that you can do that will stop this from happening, which is great.
As part of validation again, or configuration.
It's a configuration. So the third type of attack in regard to session management is the account management attack. And this comes in a variety of like brute force attacks. So you may go to Gmail and type in your password, or type in your email address, and maybe your password's wrong, and you do that a couple of times. You may see a captcha come up, or it may time out, and it may say your account gets locked out maybe for a couple of minutes or so, and it may incrementally do that. These are all good techniques to stop brute force attacks, because again, if you allow someone just to consistently bash in the server, then they could, they're able then to continually be checking to see, is this a valid password? This is a valid password, and going for a dictionary attack maybe, and be able to do that. So these type of things, having a timeout, maybe locking the account for a certain amount of time, just to make it slower, just to make that process slower, similar to how we do actual with hashing and stuff. We slow down that process. And another thing with account management is support for weak credentials. So allowing someone to, or actually requiring someone to not include, you're only able to use, alphanumeric characters. You're not able to use any special ones. You're only allowed to have a password up to 10 characters, which is one of the laughs. Because I'm thinking, hang on a minute, are you actually storing this in clear text then? Or plain text? Because a hash is always going to be the same length. Yeah. So there should be no problem about this person being able to input a ridiculous 50-character password with loads of weird, funky stuff. Because once it's hashed to the same size as any other password. So that is a thing to pay attention to, is to allow people to use passwords that are strong. Another one that I see quite a bit, and I'm sure I've had the problem with someone actually as a joke doing this to me, is the exploiting the password reset. Because so what do you do with a password reset? They enter a small bit of personal information, like what school did you go to, or what was the name of your first dog. For people with a public profile, and this has actually burnt quite a few people with a public profile who are like celebrities, is because they're easy to social engineer, because they can just go on Wikipedia and find this information out. So, my advice there is actually, as a user, and this is what I do, is I don't put the right answers in. I put absolute rubbish in. Because, people know that the school I used to go to, stuff like that. People know, so I put rubbish in, and stuff that's complete lies. At least that way, then, they can't go around that way, because that's just the back door into it.
I'll be honest. I don't see the need for having to do that at all. I mean, if the user has registered an email address and it's their email address, which you would assume it has to be because it's what it was registered in the first place, then send all the reset information to the email address.
I suppose like if your application was an email platform.
Yeah.
So you would then have to. I mean, there's a lot of there's questions, and you have random questions and stuff. You can have like a couple of questions, but my advice is to put wrong answers in all the time. So ways to get around these attacks are to protect them cookies. Protect. So there's a couple of things you can do there. You can use the HTTP only flag, and that can be set in a cookie. It can be actually set in PHP. It can be set globally in the PHP ini file or on a per instance basis. What this does is it stops the scripting languages from having access to the cookies. So it stops JavaScript being able to do document.cookies and seeing that cookie in there. Another thing is to store all the session information server-side. So never store anything except the session ID in the client-side cookie. Don't store the username, don't store the password, don't store any information that could jeopardize or, help the hacker break into the system. Another one is to check for suspicious activity and immediately destroy any suspect session. So if the user, these are the things I was finding today, and it's ways like just logging out, checking and making sure that the browser user agent and the IP address are the same, for that session. So someone can't, do these session hijacking because the likelihood of them being on the same IP address with the same user agent is very rare.
That's a great tip, actually. I like that one.
Just have it, and the one problem with the IP address is it does play around and cause issues with proxies. So what you can actually do, and what I saw was the partial IP address. So saying that the first, 2 blocks, the first, 192.168, these two are the same as instead of having to be the full unique IP address. And again, if they don't, then regenerate the IP, regenerate the session and kill that other session because that may have been compromised. Another thing is always regenerate the session ID when elevating your privileges or changing between HTTP to HTTPS because, again, they could be compromised. And regenerating your ID is really simple. It's just session_regenerate_ID. And what that actually does is you can set to true, so it would delete the old session ID but keep all the information. And it's good. So anytime you elevate privileges, that includes, so logging in, obviously, is the big one. So as when you log in, you give them a new session ID. Any information, say like updating maybe, the user details and stuff, maybe changing your password, give them a new session, all these things to stop if an intruder has been able to compromise the system and be able to, compromise that user and get their one session ID, make it so any time that they're doing anything that could be wrong to regenerate the ID.
On CodeIgniter, if you wanted to use the session library, you had to set an encryption key. Was that working on a load of this kind of stuff? Was that to do with
actually,
this? Is that more for cross-site?
No. So that actually would be that actually encrypts the information for the whole site. So that would just be a simple encryption that actually has its two-way encryption. So unlike hash, you could actually encrypt it. So what the actual cookie that we actually see in the browser is complete gubbins until we go back to the server, and then we're able to decode it. But what also that allows you to do is also just check to make sure no one's tampered with it.
Yeah,
which is a good thing as well. Another thing with the cookie actually in that front is the flagging as secure. So what this does, if you say it's secure, it's not allowed to go through a unprotected protocol. So it will not be able to go through HTTP. You can only go through a secure protocol such as HTTPS, and that stops eavesdroppers and snooping. And also expire the sessions quickly. Don't allow them to be inactive for hours. And also re-challenge the user on key application actions. So that's an interesting one. So say if the user needs to update the details, I'm sure you see this maybe on Amazon. I'm quite notorious for this. Is that if you try and update your details on Amazon, it will actually ask you for your password again and username.
Yeah.
And that's because it's going to revalidate that you're that user in case someone has come along and be able to snoop to get that session. And of course, the other thing is to allow and encourage strong passwords. Don't put fictional limits on passwords because the hash will always be the same length.
Yeah, definitely.
And that on top of the fact that with the PHP file, you can set it so it globally does this. So it uses secure cookies. Uses the HTTP only, but also you can set it so it isn't allowed to use the get parameter, which is a good one because that's another common trait. You can set it to use only cookies. Now the problem with that then obviously is that if the client doesn't have cookies enabled, it won't work. But the likelihood of that happening is very rare. So I actually do set that to only use cookies.
Cool. That's a really interesting one. That I'm going to have to do some more research on that. That's one of the ones I definitely am less aware of and have implemented. I mean, is it fairly common practice would you say that this kind of stuff gets implemented, or would you say, although it's obviously very much a risk, is this ones that people don't know about so much? So maybe it's one of the. Well, I guess it must be because it's it's number 2. So
I mean, it's one of those things that I've never actually taken the time to really truly investigate because I've always been using frameworks that deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And then
Code
you
Igniter,
suddenly now because
Laravel.
I'm making something like this, and yes, I know it throws up the argument: why am I doing this when now I've got to encompass all this stuff, and rather than using a framework that does it all.
Well, it's good practice, but I mean, it's good, and
it
it's good to know. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I've always been so very vanilla with this because I haven't bothered to look into it, and now I have, and yeah, there's a lot of work that you can do to secure an application, but that's the great thing about frameworks is they take that away.
Yeah.
It's the pro and cons of them. And the third one, our friend, is our good old cross-site scripting, which I know that you've done a little bit of work on your framework to deal with that, haven't you, at the moment, or are you still?
I've done a few bits and bobs. I mean, there's quite a few levels to cross-site scripting, isn't there?
There is.
The main kind of thing I'm aware of with it is injecting JavaScript into form fields, and I don't know, to give a horrible example, I suppose someone could, if you don't protect against cross-site scripting and you've got a form in your database, a form field in your database that suddenly someone injects, I don't know, very, very rude site.com, injects that with an iframe, into your database, and then when you visit that page, suddenly you've got indecent image. That's a very crude example, but something which definitely can happen.
Absolutely. And again, these can all be done using tools. Automated bots and stuff can do this.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of cross-site scripting attacks. There's one called reflective cross-site scripting. And it's a fancy way of saying pretty much that it's the idea that, so an attacker gives a user a malicious URL. So say, again, Lewis, you're the nice guy. I'm the evil hacker. I give Lewis a URL that I specifically crafted with a cross-site scripting payload. What I may have done is, so it's got a bit of maybe JavaScript in there. That's maybe I want to make him so he does visit a page or certain include an iframe, or I want to get his cookies you to try and do the actual the initial attack, the session attack. Maybe what I do is I send that via social media, or what I do is I use something like a URL shortening service like Bitly, so you can't even see what I'm doing. So that's quite a sneaky way of doing it. And then so the user clicks on it, so Lewis clicks on it, he goes to my target site. If the cross-site payload is successful, it will be reflected. So the stuff that I've included in my payload will be reflected back to him as a user. So what that means is that he's gone to the site to the server. The server's then responded and emitted a HTML response with my bad stuff in there. And now the user has it in his browser. And then, so say Lewis has this in his browser that I want to get his cookies. So then the client data is exfiltrated back to the attacker. So then I then make me the JavaScript. What it does is it will dump all his cookies, all his cookie information, so his sessions and stuff, and it will send a request to one of my pages on my own server as a hacker. And then I'm able to go, and now I've got your PHP session, etc. And I can then pretend to be you. That's a very scary one. That's a reflective one.
It's a scary one, but it's a very easily managed one. Thankfully,
well, it's an easy one. Well, it's easy. So there are a couple of. It's easy to say, but again, with the SQL injection, it's hard to put in practice because sometimes people miss these things and stuff.
Yeah.
The second one, the other one is stored cross-site scripting or persistent cross-site scripting, and the idea here is that the attacker has already been able to inject something into the database. That is even if Lewis, so there was it's your example again, Lou, of the iframe. Say you've been able to add a page into the database, or a widget or something, and I've been able to say, oh yeah, this is there, and then what happens is that anytime I visit that web pet site, it's going to include this into the page without me having to do anything. So I don't even have to have a specially generated, crafted URL. It's already in the database. So an example of this is like, say, a search page, and you have your trusted and untrusted data. So you see this on Google a lot, your query. So you search for a query and you'll say, hello, you searched for, and then in strong, get out, the actual query. Now, normally what you would do is just a get parameter. Well, you wouldn't. This is the way you shouldn't do it. Is you'd use a get parameter maybe with the query, and you just literally transparently reflect that information into the response. Now, I could come along though as a malicious user and say, oh, here you go, here's a query, and I just used script, and I grab your document.cookies, and then so what this then does is then I'm able to then make it so I maliciously get your cookies, or you commonly find this in image sources and stuff, and then so then I'm able to actually I'm able then to be able to compromise your login credentials, your actual session, by using these cookies that you've given to me.
Yeah.
There are ways to protect yourself from this, like always. I'm sure the one we all know about is it's encoding. So it's always encode your output and never reflect untrusted data. Always encode. Now, you could do the other way, the way you should always do it really is by whitelisting untrusted data, so does it adhere to the expected patterns? But you should also encode anything that you send out, any response that you've returned to the user should be encoded. Even if it's stuff from the database, because you don't know if maybe the database got compromised another way, maybe for a system, for the actual system itself. So always anything. So the golden rule is every bit of information must be validated on input and escaped on output. So that's the golden rule for presenting cross-site scripting.
Any recommendations for ways of encoding on output?
So there is so this is quite a good topic, because a lot of people would just say, we'll just use add slashes or HTML entities on their own. The trouble is you need to encode for the context. So, if you're encoding HTML, is different to encoding JavaScript, to encoding CSS, into encoding attributes in HTML. So to use the wrong encoding in the wrong context is useless. And it's actually as bad as not encoding at all. So if I'm encoding HTML, what I do is actually I modify. I use the Laravel's framework quite a bit, and they've got a really good helper. And it's actually just a very simple. It's the HTML entities, but it's got a couple of options. So you should, by default now, the encoding is UTF-8, but you should always specify what encoding you want to do, so you get around those encoding issues. But also, you should encode end quotes. So you should encode all quotes, so it will convert both double and single quotes to their actual, their presentable equivalent. And what this does is I suppose what we need to do about encoding, what it does is it converts from the HTML, the specific special HTML version, what actually that interprets as, it will convert it into what it just be displayed on that page. So it will just display that information instead of actually interpret that information.
Yeah. Cool.
I suppose the other thing, though, is sometimes you do want the user to be able to supply HTML.
Blog posts.
Yeah, like a blog post and stuff. And the way you get around that is using secure encoding libraries. So I think you've used HTML Purifier before?
Yeah, I've introduced that the first time last week. Very, very nice and easy to use. Yeah, you just pass the data through. I think it's just Purify, the function call and stuff. So, that was as good as one I could find. I mean, like I said last week, that uses whitelisting. So it was quite interesting source code to look through. But it's surprising how big the library is, actually, considering what it does.
It's a lot of work because of how varied. Because HTML can be valid in so many different ways, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
Now, I'd say that I use the Laravel's helper, but really I use that wrapped up in the Blade, Blade templating language for Laravel. Now, there's a lot of other templating languages, and what these do is they're really made to make it easier to make websites. But the genius thing about that is that they provide you with these kind of functions that allow you to protect yourself from cross-site vulnerabilities without having to continually go, oh yeah, by the way, encode this, and you have their own syntax. Ones such as Twig and Smarty, those are two that I've played around with quite a bit and had released quite a few projects with. And they allow you then to say, oh yeah, by the way, any variable. So you in Blade, I'm going to do the Blade for the example. You use the curly brackets. So you do curly bracket, open those up, pass in your variable, close, and then it will rewrite the actual script before it interprets it and actually runs it. It will rewrite that into PHP echo, but it will echo with the actual entities encoded, etc.
Yeah. I must admit, I haven't used many of those templating languages.
They're very good. They add a level of complexity, but what they do is take out that need to worry about cross-site scripting, because a lot of them you can set to default always, encode. If you don't want it to encode, you then specifically tell it to not encode, and that allows you then to be like the golden rule is to validate on input and escape on output.
Yeah,
because it's one of those things. It's very easy to do. Oh yeah, just encode it, but people forget. And there's always that, and all you need is that one variable that isn't encoded, and then your whole system's compromised.
All these listeners are going to be terrified now, aren't they?
Well,
I know I am.
It's good to know. I think it's good stuff to know. I think
it's very good to know.
It's one of those things. The more you know, the more you're scared. But actually, the more you know, the powerful you are. The more well equipped you are to deal with the problem.
I think if you just provide more than one layer, of security.
Absolutely. That's it.
Don't just put one in. Most people probably stop at one layer and think, right, they've put that in. That should stop, quote unquote, most things. That should be all right. But don't stop there. Go to the next level.
Absolutely.
Even there's 10 things obviously in this top 10 list, and even if you only implement 2 of them, you're probably going to cut out a lot of possibilities.
You're better off than where you started, aren't you? Really, and it's slowly including these things. So the fourth one is a weird name one, but it's called insecure direct object references. And the idea here, and it's quite an interesting one because I never really thought of this too much beforehand, but it's the idea. It's bad to expose references to internal implementation objects such as files, directories, or database keys. So I'm very bad at this. Like, say I've got an ID, and my IDs are auto-incrementing, and so there's a heuristic there. There's a structure there that someone could easily say, well, hang on a minute, is there ID 2? There's an ID 3. There's an ID 4. The idea then is that maybe say I've got an edit.php page that I pass in the ID. So again, I'm going to use me and you as an example, Luke. You are user 1, ID 1, and I'm at ID 2. Now I go on and I edit my page, and I find out in the actual parameter, the get parameter, oh, there's an ID 2. Well, let me change that because ID 2, or maybe there's a 3. Oh, there's no 3. Maybe there's a 1. So I go and see, oh, there's 1, and I'm like, oh, and because sometimes what's happened is the user. It turns out that the implementer hasn't actually made it so I can only check, implemented access controls in such a way that I'm only able to access my page. I'm able to access any page that has, as long as I provide it with the ID. Then I'm able to look at your information and change your information because I'm technically on your page. So the way to deal with that in my head is using access controls. Be explicit about what you can access. So. If I go to the edit page, I have to make sure that the ID that I'm on is the ID that I'm registered with, so I'm only able to access my edit page. And expect these to always be tested. Expect a user to come along and say, oh, can I just see if, the ID one's there, and then be able to see if I can go into Lewis's page.
I'm very pleased to say that this is actually something that I have implemented in my framework for that very reason. I built in a change password functionality thing, and then it suddenly dawned on me, well, hang on a minute, I can just change ID 3 to ID 2 and do theirs as well.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Perfect. And you want to make sure, you want to add that layer in. Hang on a minute. Are you actually the user you're saying you are?
Are you supposed to be on this page?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the trouble is now it goes into this whole thing of indirect maps. So the idea then is that should you expose any internal keys? Should I be able to tell you that you're ID 1? Does it matter that you're ID 1? And the idea then there is that, and it's a really weird one that I've only just only learned about today. It's like mapping them to temporary keys. So say you have your ID key.
Do you mean keeping them away from the URL?
Actually just generating. So you generate a temporary ID that's linked to your ID. That then I can grab your ID. That I can then grab your information, but it's only valid, say, for your session. So maybe instead of edit.php ID equal 2, I then have a table, maybe a join table that just says, oh, by the way, this ID, and it's a random GUID, maybe global unique identifier, and that's now linked to my ID 2. And then what happens is that I then have ID equal to my big old GUID, and then instead of actually providing it with 2, I provide it with that. And then for that one session, I'm able then to say that is equal to that. It's so much more for complex systems, though, I feel. Like, stuff like banks and stuff like that, because there was a big bank problem that had this, where someone literally could just change these, and because it's auto-incrementing and, enumerable source, IDs. But the big thing to take away, I thought that was kind of cool, but the big thing to take away from it is to implement access controls.
Yeah, I'm surprised this has come in at number 4.
It's very, I suppose, because of, I was quite surprised, I was thinking, hang on a minute, do I even, it seems overkill to have to make a temporary table, but I suppose because this list is for all organisations, big and small, bigger system, but, I suppose we don't want to know, I suppose banks don't want us to know the internal representation of their data and their IDs and stuff, because we may be able, so malicious users may be able to work some stuff out from that.
Yeah, and what you're saying is that the key that gets generated is only unique to that session.
That's it, and random.
So the next time,
and then the next time you'll have a new one, and you will never know what your real ID is.
So that seems like a very, very, very good idea. Actually, there's no reason why that shouldn't be commonly.
And another thing, I don't know if you're like me, and I'm pretty bad. I always name the form variables or names the same as the database column names.
No comment.
So like first underscore name. So I do that because I always think it's easier and it looks nicer. And obviously now I'm thinking, hang on a minute, should they be the same? Because the more information you're giving to the user, the worse. But again, this is for big systems. If you're a bank, you need to worry about it. If it's, you know, a simple e-commerce site that we have, the problems that you're going to face are the top three that we had. And this is a weird one because the last one we talk about today is the fifth one, which is the security misconfiguration. Now, I think this is probably actually more important than the fourth one, but this is attacker gaining access to an insecure resource. So on your server, via maybe you haven't updated your software, your error logs, you've got unsecure logs. An example of this actually is that you can sometimes go to a Google, like if they display errors are on, and you can sometimes Google search, and you can do a specially crafted Google search that will look for error logs of specific formats on unprotected logs on sites, and you can see their logs. And obviously from their logs, from their stack traces and stuff, you can work out the database, maybe the database, structure. You can work out how their code works and everything. And the more they know, the more likelihood that they can actually try and compromise your system. So my answer to that is to harden your install. So turn off features that you aren't going to need. Do you need to use FTP? If you don't need to use FTP, disable it. Do you need to use WebDAV? No, don't need it. Any ports, any services that don't need it, remove unnecessary features. Or make sure that your software's up to date. So there's so many different layers to this. You've got your operating system, but then you've got your libraries for your operating system. You've got your web server. You've got your PHP, your interpreter. Then you've got your code libraries actually on top of PHP. Stuff like WordPress and Joomla, etc., etc. And even then it comes down to like Composer and Laravel and stuff, because all these air levels could get compromised at one. So just keeping up to date with them. And doing a simple update and just keeping up to date on like looking at the website, seeing if there's any, because if an important update happens, people will talk about it on Twitter and stuff. Another one is default accounts and their passwords, which are still enabled. Stuff like routers are bad for this. People don't change their passwords on software tools and stuff that are defaults. People can, a typical thing is you can go onto Google and type in default password for this router and type in the router name and it will give it to you. And there is a high likely chance that someone hasn't changed that router information. Now, all these things again can, be a problem. And it's the error handling. It can reveal stack traces. And another one is development. So during development, we add and we include like stack traces. We include printing development information such as variable problems because we want to know at that time, there's a problem. When it goes to production, though, you want to silence all that. You'll chuck them in your logs, which should be protected and secure, not in a place where they can be compromised by a hacker. But you want to make it so the values that are in development, that it switches from a development environment to a production environment, whereby these errors are suppressed. The user doesn't get any information. It may just get an error saying, "So, whoops, something happened." The service administrator has been notified. Whereas when we're in development, we will probably see a stack trace and some nice juicy information. That's a big one that a lot of people don't do. They keep the development flags on pretty much in production, which is a bad thing.
Yeah, thankfully that's something that I don't do. I mean, the error configuration is a big part that I looked at for a good week or so. So I took care of that. I mean, most people probably think that the environment things, let's just make sure the database settings are different.
That's exactly
it. And they don't take care of all the bits like that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, even if it's as simple as what you do is to echo out debug information, you have a debug function that then has a flag in it to just say, look, if I'm in development mode, I'm not going to echo it to the screen. I echo it to an error, to a log instead. As that is the simplest way to do it. It's just making it so you don't, because the more information the hacker has, the more likelihood they're going to be able to compromise your system.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty much me wrapped up for the first 5, which I hope I haven't scared anyone to, completely. I hope it's been semi-interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's been eye-opening for me as well. I mean, the best thing that anyone can do is to go onto the OWASP.org website and have a look through these.
Absolutely, and download. We'll put them in the show notes. We'll download, and they're going to explain it in a much better way, a much more concise way. And it's agnostic to all languages, so you don't have to be a PHP developer. You could be a Java developer, etc., etc.
Absolutely, yeah. No, that's cool. I'm just having a look through my list, seeing if there's anything that I had written down. I mean, I have distrust all data, validate everything, which is obviously we've touched on. Client side, don't use it for genuine validation.
Completely agree. Use it as a user
for security.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, user enhancement. Brilliant. To be able to, you don't have to have that site, that request response back to the server, but to expect that it's not going to be compromised is foolish.
Exactly. Always use PDO or something that encompasses that kind of database query and technology. Parameter tampering eval function. So yeah, we touched on that, didn't we? And discussed the importance of not using that and making sure that you can't pass functions like PHP info to a query string.
Yes, make sure. Yeah, disable functions is another. The PHP ini file to be able to disable the functions that you don't want anyone to be able to access to.
Cross-site request forgery. We'll obviously do that another time. Then that's
definitely. I think next week we've got that, and I think that's going to. And again, surprisingly, that's not in the top 5, which is very shocking to me. I don't know.
Yeah, and that was one of the more common ones that I'd heard of, and that was one of the things I took care of first. But there you go. Anyway, and that was pretty much. Oh, and XSS cross-site scripting. So we talked about that at length as well. Well, you did.
So I've been yabbing on again.
I tried. No. It's cool. It's you've had some good time to do a lot of research on these things today. So it's been good. It's been good to.
It's been eye-opening.
Have the information, but listen to your take on it as well.
It's very interesting, like looking at it and seeing, all the things that people can do.
Yeah, exactly. And I tell you, for one thing, but I think maybe the stance I'm going to take on what I'm making, and the same with everyone else, is I'm going to make my website the hardest website to hack that's ever been made.
And the way to do that is by not trusting the user at all. Be so pessimistic about the user. I know that sounds very harsh, but it's the best way of being. If you think the user's going to do nice things, then you're not going to be able to secure your site, because, you assume that they're going to be good.
Yeah. No one's going to be offended.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, sorry, user, I don't trust you.
I tried to hack your site, but I couldn't do it.
Yeah. Send you a very harshly worded email. You're not friendly. Oh, yeah. Dear. Anyway, I think that's me done for my stuff as well. So.
Yeah, that's me too. I mean, we've gone well over the hour again, haven't we?
Yeah. So we've got some good content in there. I think for
these listeners are getting their money's worth these days, aren't they? We're going. Should we start charging? Nah.
Charge? Yeah, we'll be a business out of this.
Yeah,
don't know about that. Yeah,
I assume we're back to our usual 4 next week. Are we?
I hope so. Yes, I think we will be. And I think what we'll be discussing, I think it's safe to say we'll be discussing the next 5 on the on that list. So,
yeah,
and also chiming on any stuff that we think about during the week from what we've been discussing this week. I'm sure there's stuff I've forgotten or you've forgotten, and we can bring it up.
Well, over the course of this week, I'm going to embark on trying to implement some of these things. So it'd be great.
That'd be awesome to get your feedback on that. Yeah. Because, let's just say, it's fine us talking about it at a high level. Actually using it and doing that is really where people care about it.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to put a lot of links in the show notes, which is material I found today, which I found really useful, and it was really interesting.
Yeah, no, I think brilliant. Thanks, Ed, for sharing.
Well, thank you for spending this time with me, sir, and thank you, listeners.
Pleasure as always.
And listeners, if you have any questions on this, anything I got wrong, please email us at contact@3devsandamaybe.com and we'll read it out in the show and answer it. So it'd be awesome.
Cool. Yeah, quite a few people did request for us to discuss some of these issues. So hopefully, to those people, this has been helpful to you.
Yeah, even if it's just a starting block, just one of those, just to get you thinking about these things. Really,
if you just take one thing from it, that could be the difference between your website getting hacked. So. Hopefully it's been helpful.
Awesome. All right then. Well, it's been great speaking to you, Lou. And
you too, mate.
I'll see you next week.
See you later, people.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to 3 Devs and a Maybe. You can contact us at contact@3devsandamaybe.com or follow us on Twitter at 3 Devs and a Maybe.